let's begin content block 1, which is all about critical analysis. So I've kind of like split it into sub points. So firstly, what is critical analysis? Part 1, reading your text, and part 2, writing analysis. So approaching HSC English, okay? I need you to know this. English is different from your other subjects. You can't get there through rote learning, okay? It's about understanding. Distinct from other subjects, and especially other essay writing subjects, you can't rote learn. It's not about memorization. It's about understanding and adapting, okay? Please don't underestimate that. I know you maybe have heard that before and you're told that. Take it from me. Really, really grapple with it. It's the only way you're really going to achieve well in HSC English, no matter if it's English Standard, Advanced, or Extension 2, okay? Does not matter. You need to understand. There is no, I'm going to memorize this, I don't know, this essay or this body paragraph, go in and, make it work. No, you need to have kind of a rough general essay that you can really bend to the question to show you understand, okay? All about application. For those of you that do legal studies or ancient history, modern history, business studies, those subjects in particular, the way you essay write for those or write for your short answers is completely different to English, okay? So please do not think, all right, essay subject or essay-ish subject, I'm going to treat them the same. No, English is very different, okay? The point of HSC English is to get you to become a critical thinker, okay? That can creative communicators. You can gain personal enrichment from a love of English, literature, and learning, okay? Ultimately, hopefully what you're kind of starting to gather is that English is about you. I know that sounds really cliche. I know that sounds like, yeah, whatever, my marker doesn't really care about me. No, that is true to the max. That is 1,000% true. English is about you. You will be marked on how authentic your piece is, okay? How unique it is. You'll be marked on this phrase here, your personal voice. We're going to get into that more in a few minutes, but I just want you to have a bit of a think about what a personal voice actually means. It's something that teachers throw around a lot, right? We need more personal voice. Your personal voice isn't strong enough. What does it actually mean though? What is a personal voice? So start to have a think about it as we go through this so you can, so when we get to it, we kind of have some ideas floating around. Okay, putting that to the side for a second. Other things about English, HSC English, it's obviously compulsory, right? And because it's compulsory, we have to do well. Not only is it compulsory in the sense that you have to do it, it's compulsory in the sense that it will be 2 of the units that count, no matter what. So it's not like, oh, okay, I have 12 units. Oh, English will be the one that won't count. No, English has to count. So we have to give time and attention to it. One of the big misconceptions that I would like to kind of tackle today and all the time is this idea that by the time you do your first assessment for a topic, like reading to write, for example, you must be at a 20 out of 20 already. Of course, it's great to be at a 20 out of 20, and I commend people who got that in their first reading to write assessment or their first assessment of Year 12. But really, the point of Year 12 and Year 11 is that you will, of course, develop as you go along, right? That's why you're tested on the same stuff multiple times. We don't test you on the same stuff just for the fun of it and just because, by our last assessment, we can't be bothered to teach you anything else. Let's just reuse that. No, we're testing you to give you the opportunity to grow from the time you first did your assessment, okay? Why am I telling you this? So it changes your mindset, okay? So by the time that you get to Year 12, you're starting to see your assessment as not just something that needs to be checked off a list, but as a growth opportunity. So when you're given your feedback, you're actually asking your teacher, okay, sir, miss, whoever, what does this actually mean? Can we meet? Can we talk about this? Okay. This is definitely the case for Year 11, okay, because you'll have your prelims in term 3 and You'll be reassessed on reading to write and all your other units of work, but it's particularly the case for year 12. So use this learning in year 11, okay, but also really use it in year 12. So let year 11 be the year where you really start to understand the importance of developing your skills all throughout the year for a certain unit. That once you pass the unit, it's not just done forever. Because obviously in year 12, once you do the common module in year 12, it's not like it's gone forever like it was in year 10 or year 8 or whatever. It's going to come up again in your, trials. You're in your trials and in your HSC, okay? So you need to transition into, I need to keep developing this. It's really hard to do that, and it becomes really tiring and, I'm not going to lie, boring, sometimes frustrating, because you can feel like I just have to keep doing this and I feel like I'm getting nowhere, but you still need to do it. Okay. All right. Tangent over. But I believe that was a very important thing to say. Apart from that though, you will be consumers of media for your whole lives, okay? So the point of HSC English is to get you to deconstruct what you see in the world around you and what you're presented with. Does this mean that the markers want you to be sitting at movies watching, I don't know, the new Spider-Man movie, and you're sitting there and going, oh, Peter Parker actually used this kind of color there, and this meant that? No, okay? I know it might feel like that sometimes, but no. What this really helps you with English skills is when you're presented with propaganda, for example, or maybe the media is presenting something in a really particular way and you're able to see straight through it and say, or start to question things, say, okay, that's really kind of clickbaity, that's a really big sensationalized title, and you can start to question it, okay? Believe it or not, English helps you with that. And English is the only subject in school where you get to play around with big ideas, okay? Big literary theories, big concepts, literally the most random of stuff, and have fun with that. Okay, so keep all of that in mind as you study throughout year 11. No one can do the work for you. You have to do some hard thinking about the syllabus concepts that we'll look at today, as well as the ideas in your text, okay? So, what does a good HSC English student actually look like? Well, it's someone that actually reads their texts. Yes, for those of you who have thus far gotten through English by looking at Spark Notes or Lit Charts or one of those, there are an abundance of them. But if you're one of those people, it's going to be really difficult to do well in the HSC. And I'm going to come back to why that is in a second. But for now, you need to read your text is what I'm trying to get at here, or watch your text, obviously depending on what form it is, right? If it's a novel, poem, film, whatever. It's also important that you have an opinion on your text. You need to ask questions about why what you are studying is significant. You need to read widely, and you need to write where possible to develop your personal voice. This is something I'm going to go on about in a second and annoy all of you guys with. So firstly, let's kind of lay the foundation with critical analysis. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, if you guys were kind of around and heard, maybe some of you have joined along the way, but I'll kind of recap. In both my student feedback that I've heard from students about something that they struggle with, and something that I've been able to pick up when I'm marking students' writing, is a lot of students analyze, but they don't critically analyze. Okay, so to analyze is to merely identify the components and the relationships between them, draw out and relate implications. Whereas to critically analyze is to add a degree or level of accuracy, depth, knowledge, and understanding, logic, questioning, reflection, and quality to analysis. Okay, the main idea there is that there's judgment. Now, when we say judgment in analysis, I'm not only asking for you to say, the composer has effectively done this, the composer successfully does this, the composer does this intentionally, the composer deliberately does this. No. What else has to do with judgment? Well, you talking about why they've chosen to speak about this issue or this idea, okay? Their context. You also talking about audience effect, the effect it has on you as the reader or viewer or audience member, whatever, okay? That's also a part of judgment because you're justifying your argument. You're saying, well, this is my argument that they're saying this, and this is how I know that this is actually being achieved because they were intending to do this in terms of their context. They were inspired to do it and intended to do it, and they're actually doing it because the audience effect has been achieved. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, so why do we actually analyze text though? Let's start with the groundwork. Firstly, to better understand the complex ways texts explore profound questions and ideas, to appreciate the details and nuances of particular characters, to see inventive and sophisticated use of language and how it contributes to the aesthetic qualities of the text, and to understand the impact of a text on its people and society, okay? I'm not just saying this to randomly say this. I'm saying this because these are the kind of things that you want to be connecting to in your analysis, okay? It reveals the impact of the text on its people and society, for example. So if you're looking at a given text, you want to be telling me what that impact is on its people and society at large, for example. Okay, my favorite. We're about to go into personal voice, and I can finally kind of explain everything that I've been hinting at so far. So, hold up, Chloe. What do I actually, or what do you actually mean by personal voice? What does it actually mean, right? Well, let's deconstruct this together. So far, you probably have studied a text in class, right? Discuss some of the common themes, some of the common experiences that the characters go through, some ideas of the text, and have been asked to write about these in some format. Okay, so write an essay about Macbeth. Most of you or some of you would have studied that in year 10, right? Write an essay on Macbeth. Talk to me about deception in Macbeth, for example, or make a website about it, make a poster about a video, etc. Okay, there are heaps of things that they can do. So your arguments and ideas would have likely been very similar to your peers, right? If I asked you to write an essay about Macbeth, I'm going to see heaps of paragraphs about, deception, trust, ambition. I'm going to kind of see the same stuff over and over. And that's fine. And that's what you would have done. Your evidence you used to support your writing might have been evidence you looked at in class, you found online, or otherwise it would be very commonly used evidence, okay? You may have expressed a very neutral opinion and in fact may have not argued but explained your point, okay? That's fine. That's what most of you would have been doing so far, okay? At least up until year 10, hopefully we've started to transition out of this, but that's probably what most of us are familiar with, okay? And that's fine because up until this point it worked. But now that we're a term down in year 11, and as we keep pushing through year 11 and to prepare ourselves for year 12, we need to change, okay? There needs to be a major shift in focus from articulating kind of these generic ideas that you and your peers, you and the next person are going to share in. I really want you guys to focus on articulating your own nuanced. What does nuanced mean? Complex, specific, particular ideas, okay? And your understanding of your text. If you haven't already noticed that there is that shift, we need to start noticing, okay? So what does that actually mean though, okay? These are really kind of abstract ideas. What the heck is a nuanced personal voice? What does that even mean? Well, as your marker, when I'm reading your essay, I want to see some different ideas from the person whose essay I just read. I want to see something different. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be thinking, in Macbeth, this random theme is being spoken about that's not being spoken about at all. No, it's the way you look at ambition, for example. It's the way you look at deception, okay? My apologies to those of you who haven't studied Macbeth. Just know Macbeth is a play about deception and ambition, okay? So what I'm trying to say here is, even though you may still look at some common ideas or common themes, common experiences, whatever, it's the way you look at them that needs to be different. There needs to be some element of flair and difference that's captivating me, okay? As well as that, I need to see confidence in your writing. I need to see that you're comfortable articulating your point since you're arguing your own views on the text. A lot of teachers will tell you, and a lot of markers in general will tell you, yeah, it's very obvious to us when a student is kind of just writing off stuff they found on the internet or kind of copying a very generic idea and just kind of writing really generically. You might be thinking, okay, how does my teacher actually know that I'm doing that? Because we can tell you're not confident in the idea. Why? Because your idea is really similar to everyone else's, your argument's really similar, and your evidence is really similar. Okay, so it doesn't show any confidence to kind of stray away from everyone and say something really unique and powerful and profound. So another element of that personal voice is being confident, okay? Showing us you're confident by picking really weird, unique, random in the sense that it's different from everyone, okay? Not random as in it doesn't relate to your point. Pieces of evidence to support yourself. So I can already hear the questions being typed. Everyone's asking me, all right, Chloe, let's be real. How do we actually have a personal voice? So here are some things that you guys should do throughout year 11 to start developing your personal voice, okay? Before I actually talk about them, sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself. I want you to really, really, really use year 11 as the time where you're developing your personal voice, okay? Yes, of course, try your hardest in year 11 and do everything, but really, really, really focus on developing your personal voice. That should be, hopefully, everyone's big goal in year 11. Why? Because it'll pay off in year 12. You don't want to be a student that is trying to figure out what a personal voice is, how to make it work, what your personal voice is, how to strengthen your personal voice in year 12. Of course, that doesn't mean by the time you enter term 4 this year, you're going to be like, yep, I have the best voice when I write, I'm, the best of the best. No, that doesn't mean that at all. But you want a personal voice, okay? So how do you actually develop it? Firstly, be a student who engages in class discussion, okay? If you're someone that does that and you still feel like you don't have a personal voice, not just class discussion that's important. I really want you guys to recognize the areas of discussion that you possibly disagree with your peers or the areas that you find interesting personally and would like to explore. So when you're having a class discussion about whatever text you're studying, right? Let's say The Handmaid's Tale, because some of you guys will study it this term. Or some do next term and switch it, but nonetheless, let's say you're studying The Handmaid's Tale. If someone says something about The Handmaid's Tale, like a friend of yours or someone in your class, whoever, puts a hand up and says, oh, Miss Sir, I think this about The Handmaid's Tale, and you're sitting there and you're going, actually, I didn't think that when I read The Handmaid's Tale. I actually thought it was this. Hold on to that, okay? Really, really fixate on that and focus on that. Why? Because that's something that's unique. That's something that starts to allow you to have a personal voice because it means that in some way you're different to your peers. That doesn't make you wrong or them wrong or whatever. It just means that you have different ideas from everyone else. And really focus on that, okay? Or you could do that, or also think about areas that you actually find interesting. Now, these could be areas that you and your peers agree on. You don't have to be that person that always goes against the grain and always tries to be different from everyone else. No. If you think that, okay, I actually really like this idea, it might be a little bit generic and a lot of people are covering it, but I genuinely find this interesting. That's fine as well. What will make you different is your confidence and the way you're arguing it, okay? Because if you've actually read your text and studied your text, the way you argue it is going to be tied to your personal interpretation. So your personal voice is going to come directly out of that. Okay. Visit websites like JSTOR, Google Scholar, academia.edu, etc., and read scholars and literary critics who have discussed certain topics in your text. this is something that I definitely used this technique in high school to help me develop my own personal voice. So a literary scholar, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with the phrase, or a literary critic, those refer to people who it is their profession to study literature, break it down, kind of have arguments about what the meaning of a text is, why the composer wrote the way they did, what the actual audience effect that is intended is compared to what the actual audience effect is. They basically study text, if you can't tell. So if you're looking for some interesting ideas, think these people have to write their theses on text. So someone, I guarantee you, has wrote a thesis on your text. They needed to have unique ideas in order to write that thesis. So if you're looking for some unique ideas, they're going to have some. I cannot recommend this enough. Go to these websites, type in your text, type in maybe a theme or an idea related to your text that you're interested in, and see what they come up with. Because I guarantee you will find at least something that will help you. And also they use evidence, right? They use quotes from your text to support what they're saying. So you can kind of take from their evidence as well, which is really helpful. Okay. Also, go through websites like SparkNotes, CliffNotes, LitCharts, as I said. That's all I can think of at the moment. And read their pages on your texts, okay? That's probably shocking because you've probably never been told to actually go to those websites and use them. And a lot of teachers are like, don't use them. Why I'm saying to do that is kind of similar to what I said with the class discussion. Go through those websites because they kind of break down like the common themes in your text, right? Go through them and say, all right. Yep. I disagree with what they said about this. I disagree with what they said about this. I disagree with what they said about this. And again, just like I said for that class discussion point, hold on to that and flesh those out and let them become whole arguments. Read other people's unique ideas, perhaps in essays you can find on the ATAR Notes websites, people's past essays. Again, a bit similar like to this point here. Other past students or other peers of yours have written essays on your very text. So it's always a good idea to go suss out what other people have written about your text and see if you can borrow those same ideas. Okay, so it's always good to know what you need to do as a student. It's arguably better at times to know what I need to do as a marker, because then you know, all right, if my marker needs to do this, I'm going to do what they're looking for so I can achieve better results. So this is what I'm looking for. I'm telling you this so you know to do it. Firstly, I'm looking for whether a student has their own personal voice in their writing. I'm waiting for someone to wake me up. Because as I said, a lot of the time I'm presented with the same kind of essay over and over on a text, especially when you look at the same text for years and years. You get really accustomed to looking at the same arguments over and over. And that will be the same case with your teachers and certainly the same case with your HSC markers. So over time, I'm kind of just silently pleading for someone to wake me up. So when I do have someone that's really unique and different, I'm woken up, right? And I'm looking for that. And immediately, I'm really eager to keep reading. Secondly, I'm also looking for how clearly and effectively this personal voice is argued. Now, please don't mistake personal voice as I'm just going to go out and disagree with everything that anyone has ever said about this text, even if it's the most clear thing. For example, not that anyone studies The Lion King, but I'm sure it's something that we're all familiar with. Don't try to argue that The Lion King doesn't talk about family. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say here. If there's a text that you're studying and it's very evidently talking about a certain idea, don't try to say that, in fact, no, it's not talking about this idea just for the sake of it. Do see where you have your own unique ideas and you disagree with people, but don't disagree just for the sake of disagreeing. That will hinder your personal voice. You won't be displaying any confidence in your writing. Okay, so what do those two criterion look like? Firstly, using distinct and unique evidence to support your view. I would expect that if you've read the text and you have unique ideas that you're confident in because you read your text or watched your film, whatever, I would expect that you would have unique evidence as well, right? Because you know the entirety of your text. So I'm looking for evidence that I don't see over and over, okay? Things that are different. Things that were maybe, again, a bit random in terms of everyone else's evidence. It's a bit random from everyone else, but it supports your unique idea really well. I'm also looking for multiple pieces of evidence. I'm looking for those who diverge from common perspectives on the text in any way. So this could mean having a completely different argument, or again, as I said, having a really common argument, but it's argued in a really unique way. Okay, so yes, you're exploring, family for the Lion King, but the way you're looking at it is different. Fully articulating your perspective with flair and confidence. If it is your opinion, you should be able to write heaps about it, as I said. Okay, so it's all right if, as I'm saying this, you're maybe kind of thinking, oh my gosh, I don't really know what my personal voice is. I don't really have a personal voice yet. I haven't really experimented with a personal voice. Am I going to fail and crumble? No, okay? Don't stress too much. As I said, let year 11 be the growth year. Let it be the year that you really develop your personal voice. Because as I said, but actually I'm not going to try and go back to the slide. It'll be so far away now. But as I said, in year 10, you were not used to using that personal voice, right? You, odds are your teacher didn't really focus that much on a personal voice, and that's fine. The idea of year 11 is to develop these skills. So do that, all right? So actually use year 11 as, your confidence building year so you can really aid yourself when you get to year 12. Just remember what a personal voice is throughout this year, its importance, and how you're going to be assessed on it. This stuff. For now, don't worry too much about actually writing your personal voice. Just focus on starting to develop one. So engage in class discussions, read others' unique perspectives, whether that be on an academic website like JSTOR, or if it's going on atarnotes.com and looking at a past essay response, okay? Whichever. Okay, so as you do more and more writing, right, as we start to get into term 2 now, and then term 3, and then HSC, ensure that you continually are asking for feedback. This is really, really, really important, okay? It's really important because how are you going to know if you're doing this? Well, you can kind of mark yourself maybe, but the best way is getting feedback from your teacher, your tutor, your siblings, maybe who have done the HSC. That's the best way you're going to know if you're actually strengthening your personal voice. Remember that personal voice and how effectively you can support it with textual evidence is the number one thing that your marker is interested in, okay? So it is critical that your personal voice evolves throughout the year. So this is kind of the hierarchy that we want to be following through year 11. So starting from kind of what we want to start with as we study our text throughout the year and year 12 and where we want to build up to. Now, I will quickly say the reason why I'm bringing up year 12 so much is because I want to, as I keep saying, I want you guys to use this year to propel you into year 12 so that when you get to year 12, we're not worried or anxious or, oh my gosh, we're behind. We know what we need to do. We have those skills developed and you can do it. Okay, so firstly, you want to read and view your text and begin to deconstruct the main ideas yourself, right? That's what you do immediately when you read or watch your text. Then you engage in class discussions. So that's where you're exposed to new ideas, or you may be forced to kind of defend your own, which is always fun. And through that discussion, you kind of strengthen your own ideas. Then you want to develop your notes for your text on the main ideas and themes in your text. And then begin to do practice writing. This is something else that you likely have not done yet in year 10 or maybe in your first term of year 11, okay? You maybe haven't really done a lot of practice writing. Start to do more of it. Because in year 12, you're going to have to do heaps of it. So build up to it. So by the time you get to year 12, it's not so difficult for you to sit down and say, all right, I'm going to do a
20-mark response. And that's something that a lot of students struggle with because they haven't built up to it. So start doing more and more practice writing. What does that mean? Finding another question that someone did online, like as their assessment. So let's say I'm in term 2 of year 11 again, and I'm studying The Handmaid's Tale. I'm going to go online and look at someone's past assessment that they did in The Handmaid's Tale, grab their question that they got asked, and write my own response to it. Give it to my teacher and say, hey miss, hey sir, whoever, can you please give me some feedback on this, specifically my personal voice. Do I have a personal voice? Is it strong? What are you feeling about it, okay? That's what you want to start doing. So yeah, next step is actually hand it in and receive feedback on your practice writing, and then you want to apply your feedback and continue to do more and more practice writing. Okay, so jumping back to critical analysis, okay? I know we might be thinking, hold on, Chloe, why are we talking about this now? We're talking about personal voice. Why did I just randomly chuck personal voice in there? Well, with purpose, of course. Because critical analysis comes from personal voice, as you can see, okay? You need to have your own ideas, and then you need to analyze them. You can't be critical if you don't have your own ideas. You can't be confident confident unless you're critical, because there's nothing to be confident about if you're just kind of explaining ideas. So what is not critical analysis? Let's cover critical analysis by first defining what it is not. So firstly, critical analysis is not just using quotes to describe the general events of the plot. This is something I see a lot of when I'm marking student responses, particularly in year 11. I don't want you guys to just, describe the events of the plot. So something like, this is what is really common in a lot of essays, something like this. It was somehow slightly frightening, like the gambling of tiger cubs, which will soon grow up into man-eaters. Here, Winston uses a simile to show how the Parsons are afraid of their own children, turning them into the ministry of love. There is no analysis there. There you're literally just telling me what's happening in that quote. I don't want that, okay? I don't want plot retell. Or if you paraphrase what's in the quote. So here, if you use quotes to describe the events of the plot, this is you just using a quote to literally describe what's happening in the scene. I don't want that. You have to assume that your marker has read your text or watched your text. Paraphrasing the quote is a bit similar, but instead of you telling me what's going on in the scene, it's where students retell what just happened in that quote. So for example, she had the oddest sense of being herself, invisible, unseen, unknown. This being Mrs. Dalloway, not even Clarissa anymore. This being Mrs. Richard Dalloway. Clarissa feels that as she has aged, that she has become invincible. Youth is behind her, and now she is only known as the wife to Richard Dalloway and not as Clarissa. You've literally just retold me what's in that quote, okay? These are things we do not want. We do not want. There is no analysis there. You haven't drawn out the techniques, told me about the effect of the technique on me or the audience. Haven't done any of that. You've literally just described the events of the plot or just paraphrased the plot, okay? I don't mean you directly, just this student, this imaginary student who wrote these analysis, which are not genuinely analysis. Okay, what else is not critical analysis? So we spoke about using quotes to describe events of the plot, or paraphrasing the quotes. Other things are pointing out techniques but not actually talking about how they develop the meaning of the text. So we'll talk about this a lot in a second, but something that I see so much of is students saying, through the use of a metaphor, and then they'll insert the quote, and then say the overall idea that's captured in the quote. So through the use of a metaphor, the composer shows us this and this about grief, for example. We do not want that. We do not want that. If you're telling me that like the composer has used a metaphor, okay, talk to me about what is actually being metaphorically referenced. What is being compared to what? What does that actually say about the character or the setting or the plot? You can't just say through the use of this technique, this is being done. Through the use of this technique, the composer is comparing this to this, which portrays these certain characteristics about the protagonist, for example. Okay, but we'll talk about that more in a second if that's not making complete sense right now. other things which is not critical analysis, asserting why the quote makes an important thematic point without including techniques. Hopefully we know that we need to include techniques all throughout our analysis. But still, shockingly, unfortunately, I still see people use evidence without techniques, which is crazy. We need techniques when we're analyzing. Okay, so these are our components of analysis. Now, I'm really hesitant to give you like a specific structure in analyzing, as in, firstly, conceptual argument, secondly, quote, 3, technique. Why? Because HSC markers every year in their feedback, they're always saying that students' writing feels too blocky. And this is important. And yeah, it's important to be aware of this right now because, again, it's one of those skills you can use year 11 to develop. So what am I actually referring to when I say blocky? A lot of us use peel, teal, steel, star, a lot of those kind of paragraph structure type thingies. And your markers know what those are. So your markers can tell when it's point, explain, evidence, link, okay? It's very blocky is what they're kind of meaning when they say that, right? It's like distinct, like, okay, the student now knows their point's over, time to go into your evidence or your elaboration. They don't want that. What they want instead is kind of, those kind of things that are covered, but it's very cohesive and everything flows into each other. And so that's why I'm a bit hesitant to say that this is kind of like, a rigid structure that you must follow. Really, it's things that need to be covered in your analysis. So when you're introducing a quote, these are the things that you need to cover. Does not mean necessarily that you follow it like a structure, more like a guideline or framework, okay? So, I don't know if I went over it, but just to go through these things that we need to include, you need to have your conceptual argument, your quote, your technique, the effect of the technique, and the effect on the audience. Those are 2 different things, and we'll look at that in a second. And how does this develop or affirm or complicate or rebut your conceptual argument, which is your linking sentence. Okay, for extra spice, you need your context and audience impact. Now, these are the things that I was talking about when I mentioned what actually helps you have critical analysis. Talking about why your composer was inspired to say the things that they did and what audience effect that has. So, good analysis should reflect your own opinion on the meanings of the text using quotes and techniques to flesh out the details of your interpretation. Yes, okay? This is what I was talking about with your own personal voice. You need to have your own opinion and you need to support it with quotes and evidence. So, moving on to part 2 now, where we're looking at actually reading your text. So, this is what you need to be doing when you are first kind of exposing yourself to your HSC, I say HSC is in year 11 and 12, but I guess I'll say prelim text. Firstly, you want to read the text for the first time, okay, or watch it for the first time. I'm going to say that every time because every year I get comments that say, what if my text is a movie? Read or watch your text, okay, for the first time. Not passively, and so by that I mean not like, I'm on my phone scrolling TikTok, looking at the latest tea while the movie's in the background and I'm kind of just listening. No, actually read it, watch it, and kind of make key notes or passages to analyze later. Brainstorm key ideas as you're reading it. Note the formal features, so the macro techniques, right? The structural elements of the text. And analyze any extremely obvious or recurring themes. Something that I would recommend, and something I still do, a habit I still have when I read text, and I can prove this to you guys, is I have a bunch of these different tabs. And so, why am I showing you this? Well, something that I did in year 11 and year 12 when I was reading a text is I had a certain tab as a certain color. And at the beginning of my text, like on the front page, let's say I was reading a novel, I would put context equals pink. Ideas relating to this theme is kind of like a minty green. More of a fluoro green relates to ideas about this theme. And then ideas about this theme is orange. And then as I would go through, I would, every time I see something that I could talk about for context, put down the pink. Anytime I would see something about the particular theme that I identified in the beginning, I put down this. Why? One, because it's not that hard to do that, but it will especially help you later on when you're actually starting to develop your arguments. You can go through, flick at pink. Oh, yep, that was talking about context. Oh, okay, I can use it for this argument. All right, I need evidence for this argument. Let me flick through. Oh, yep, there's that mint green. All right, I'm going to use it. I know that was a little bit random, but it was something that I can definitely say helped me, and that's what you want to be doing. Something like that, okay? I'm not saying go out and buy some like little post-it notes, but a version of that is something that you want to have. Okay, the second time that you revisit your text, you want to look at key sections to find more quotes and start to analyze, okay? So if you're someone that wants to follow a kind of similar method to what I just showed you, after you read your text and you've went and annotated with all those little tabs, I would go back to those tabs and start to maybe jot down the like quotes on a page and start to jot down, all right, what might the composer actually have been trying to say when they said this? What was the intended effect, and what is the actual audience effect? So that's what I mean by revisit. Then I would read it a second time to find the most significant quotes and passages that you missed out on the first read. So that will most likely be during class discussion. Oftentimes your teacher will give you a certain like passage and will say, all right, let's discuss this. And that will likely maybe be something that you haven't focused on. Maybe you have, but I can guarantee you'll look at some stuff that you haven't looked at on your own. And it will kind of expose you to new ideas that you can use to form arguments. Okay. This is something that I need everyone to listen up for, because this is, without a doubt, another big area. This personal voices are two big areas that I have to give feedback on all the time, okay? And this I need you guys to listen to, because form is always not spoken about at all, or accidentally spoken about in terms of language. Form and language is not the same, or are not the same thing, okay? When we talk about your literary devices, that is one thing, but when we say form, that is not referring to those, okay? They're different, they're distinct. So let's look at the Oxford Dictionary of Form. So it says, it's a critical term. Okay, critical analysis, critical term, we love that, with a confusing variety of meanings. It can refer to genre or an established pattern of poetic devices, or, more abstractly, to the structure or unifying principle of design in a given work. When speaking of a form's formal properties, critics usually refer to its structural design and patterning. So, we can consider textual form to the broader structure containing language features. It is not literary devices. The best way I can explain this, and I've explained this in earlier lectures as well, so some of you guys who maybe have attended my lectures before are familiar with this, but literary techniques are micro techniques. Form is macro techniques, or form are macro techniques. What does that mean? Well, think about when you're reading a novel, and on page 21, there is a line that says, she was as fast as a tiger. Okay, that's a simile. It was on page 21. It was just in that one line there. Can highlight it. All right, it's just on that one page, just appeared once. Okay, that's a micro technique. It only appeared once on that one page, didn't mean anything else. That's it, micro. Macro, obviously, as you can probably guess, is different. It's all throughout your text. So things like setting. Setting is it's sometimes, most of the time, revisited in your text over and over. And sometimes it's treated or portrayed differently to show you an effect. But nonetheless, it's revisited. So it's not just on that one line, on that one page, once in a text. It occurs all throughout your text. Macro technique. Other things that relate to form, things like characterization. Okay, characterization refers to the way your character develops throughout the text. There's direct characterization and indirect characterization. Indirect characterization would be where
the character doesn't comment on how they've changed, but we know that they've changed through their actions, their thoughts, their words. Direct characterization is obviously then where the character turns around and says, oh my gosh, I used to be so different. Now I'm like this, okay? That's direct characterization. Nonetheless, characterization happens all throughout your text, right? It's the way your character develops. It's the way, I don't know, what's a character from a text? I'll go with Spider-Man again. It's the way Spider-Man goes from lonely Peter Parker who's all alone to Peter Parker who's Spider-Man and really fun and whatever. That's characterization, okay? Happens all throughout your text. Costuming can be a part of characterization for a film because it usually happens across many scenes. The structure. So if your text is split into parts, if it has 3 parts, it's called a tripartite. 3 parts, tripartite structure. If for poetry, because a lot of you will study poetry, if it's iambic pentameter, iambic tetrameter, all the different types of verse, if it's free verse, if it's verse, prose, those kinds of things. I'm trying to think of other things that would be for the macro techniques, okay? Now, why am I telling you this? Because in your writing, we want to see you grapple with form and literary devices. So, setting, right? As I said, is an element of form. Talk about what the effective setting is. And then when you give me examples of setting in individual quotes, bring out those micro techniques in those individual quotes. So even though you're looking at the big form element that is setting, you still have those micro techniques, okay? You're combining form and your literary devices together. So, here are some more elements of form. So the chronology or linearity of a text, so if it has kind of time jumps, or if it's just in chronological order, the narrative, perspective, epigraphs, the camera angles, the height, depth of field for a film, for a play, it's a separation of the acts, so structure, stage directions, costuming, monologues, soliloquies, heaps, okay? I'm not going to go through all of them, but form is the macro technique, so you need to think of it like that. Now, literary devices, hopefully we all know what those are. They're different, as I've been kind of trying to say. So, how do we identify techniques? Well, when you have a quote, you want to try to identify those easy techniques first. So things like tone, repetition, pronouns, tense, okay? You want to, in every piece of evidence, try to have at least 2 techniques, okay? And this will be really easy because a lot of the time you'll see that techniques work together. Very rarely, unless you have a very short quote, will you just find one technique in a quote. Usually, you can talk about many things that are working together, like a moving car, right? There are many moving parts to make a car move, to have an audience effect. It's the same idea. Many moving parts to make a car move, many moving parts to have an audience effect. This is especially the case with imagery and symbolism. Whenever you talk about imagery and symbolism in your essays, or any multimodal poster, video, whatever you have to do, you need to have techniques that are constructing them. So if you have imagery, what's constructing the imagery? Is there a lot of stream of consciousness? Is there a lot of violent figurative language? What's going on? What's constructing the imagery? Same thing with symbolism. What's constructing the symbolism? Okay, is it a metaphor? Is it a simile? What is it? Nonetheless, the main idea that I want you to focus on here is that techniques work together. So you should argue it like that this metaphor used in conjunction with, polysyndeton constructs really intense naturalistic symbolism about whatever. I would have to critique myself there though, because I didn't talk about what the metaphor is, what the polysyndeton is, and what the effect of each of those are, and then how it constructs, the naturalistic symbolism. Be as specific as possible, yes, and that comes down to talking about each individual technique still, even if you're talking about multiple.
However, don't try to pick out heaps of techniques. A lot of teachers will refer to that as making a shopping list when you have too many techniques. I would say probably 2 to 3 is a good amount, and you need to make sure you're talking about how they're working together. As I've kind of said consistently, read quotes that are against the grain. So don't try to look for kind of like the same quotes that everyone else is using, as I've been mentioning. Look for your own unique quotes. Look for how the quote might be meta. So what this means is metafiction. Metafiction is similar to breaking the fourth wall, but a little bit different. So if we have a metafictive text, it's basically acknowledging its own fictionality. It's acknowledging that it's fiction, that it's a text. So if any of you have seen Deadpool, I haven't actually seen Deadpool, but I've seen like videos of where Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool character turns to the camera and will literally say something to the audience and kind of like breaks the fourth wall of the stage, right? That's where that idea comes from. There are 3 walls of a play, and then the imaginary fourth one where the the audience can't see in, but they can. There's that imaginary fourth wall. When you break the fourth wall, you're acknowledging that the audience can see in, okay? Metafiction is kind of like that. You're acknowledging the fictionality of the play. Oh, any text, okay? It doesn't just have to be a play. So examples of that could be if you've ever been reading a text and the text, like the narration literally says, "Oh, reader," and addresses the reader and talks to you directly. Okay, that's metafictive. Or if it says, "In this story," like things where it basically addresses its fictionality. Okay, that's metafiction. And then we want to link analysis to purpose, right? To context, as I've said all throughout. Okay. Analyze using form as well, and identify self-reflexivity, aka getting meta, as I said. Okay, so highly sophisticated analysis. What does that actually look like? So let's look at this technique. Let's look at this quote together and start to look at some of the techniques that we can deconstruct. So this is an extract from Charles Dickens' Great Expectations that some of you will study in Year 12 for Module B. As I passed the church, I felt a sublime compassion for the poor creatures where were destined to go there. Sorry, let me try that again. As I passed the church, I felt a sublime compassion for the poor creatures who were destined to go there, Sunday after Sunday, all their lives through, and to lie obscurely at last among the low green mounds. Sorry, that's my own typo there. It's supposed to be who were destined to go there. All right, so we have the repetition of Sunday, okay, Sunday after Sunday, which creates a sense of monotony and futility of lower class routines, okay, that roboticness. So it's talking down on lower class, people of a lower status. We have euphemisms, okay, that idea of Sunday after Sunday. We have a condescending tone, which is another technique, because we can see that obviously we're kind of, this persona is talking down on the lower class. And we have the ironically juxtaposed symbol of virtue in the church with the way this person is talking down of the church. Okay, so there's some juxtaposition between the persona and the ideas of the persona, or the ideas that the persona is conveying, and the virtue that the church is representing. So there we've identified multiple techniques. Okay, then you want to start looking for more difficult techniques. So these are some difficult techniques, or different techniques, at least. Something that I can recommend, something that I did when I was in year 11 and 12, is I would look up literary glossary. And literally, I think Matrix Education has a literary glossary. There are some other ones. There are plenty of places that have literary techniques glossary. That's what I mean, literary techniques glossary. I'll look it up, download it, and go through. It's literally just like a glossary of all these different literary techniques. Go through and highlight, whether it be on your laptop, computer, iPad, whatever, or even on paper, highlight all the ones that you don't know. Look at what they are. Look at some examples, look at their definitions, and try to expose yourself to as many different techniques as you can. Why? Because the ones that you know really well, everyone else knows really well. So part of having a personal voice and being sophisticated in your critical analysis is having different
difficult and sophisticated techniques. Okay, so let's look at these two extracts from Robert Browning's poems, another poet that some of you guys might look at in the next 2 years. So that's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Wilt please you sit and look at her, I said. Okay, sorry for the constant mess ups as I'm reading that, but we've extracted some irony, okay, of her being painted on the wall, obviously dead, okay. For those of you who have studied this, maybe for reading to write, some of you may have, you would know that the last Duchess is dead in the poem, yet he describes her as alive, and there's some irony to that. Not to get too into it, but basically this woman has power over him even after she's died, okay? So it's ironic that he's killed her. Spoiler alert, he does kill her. I'm sorry if any of you were planning on reading that poem, but he does kill her, and some irony that she still has power over him. The synecdoche of Fra Pandolf, who's the artist, and the hands painting her, okay? Synecdoche because it's not happening at the moment, but it's a reference to kind of something that happened before. We have a rhetorical question here. Let's also read this poem. So, let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. Okay, so earlier we have the juxtaposition of romantic imagery with modernist imagery. So evening is spread out against the sky is a really romantic point of view. Not romantic in the sense of like lovey-dovey, two characters who fall in love. Romantic in the sense of an appreciation for nature, an appreciation for the imagination, okay? We can see that appreciation for nature in that quote. A modernist because there's that idea of modern society being really fragmented and destroyed and isolated. And then we have, where is that simile? Streets that follow like a tedious argument, okay? Simile connecting opposites of intellect and real experience, okay? So the streets that follow as this person's walking through the streets, that's that real experience. And then like a tedious argument, that's that intellect, okay? Do you need to know any of this for these specific poems? Maybe, if you're someone that's studying these poems. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is kind of to start looking at these more sophisticated techniques, okay? Looking for them, how do we use them? Notice how for every technique, I didn't just say, yep, rhetorical question, all right, yep, there's juxtaposition. I went in after and I kind of explained how that technique is actually being used. Okay, there's a rhetorical question, what does that actually mean? Okay, yeah, okay. Form now. So those were looking at literary techniques. Let's look at how you would analyze form. So we have the epigraph and biblical allusion of the beginning of this other Robert Browning poem. You could talk about the effect of that. I haven't studied this poem in particular, so I'm not sure what that would mean. So unfortunately, I can't cover that. But that's one element of form. We have the free indirect discourse that shows that this is not an impartial observer. This person that is, okay, I'm not sure what this person is talking about. We also have square brackets that you can see, which is characteristic of stage directions, okay? Which creates intertextuality with the Tempest, which from what I do know about this poem, it's responding to the Tempest, which is another text that you might study in year 12. Okay, and then here are some more formal elements of this visual, okay? So really the point here is that form and literary techniques must come together in your critical analysis to have sophisticated analysis. All right, so that idea about metafiction that I was talking about, where the author or protagonist or character addresses their own fictionality, you need to really look at how does the author reflect on the nature of language. Okay, so
do they subvert traditions and conventions? If you have a composer who is focused on one moment in time or one genre, they belong to one genre or one era. So if they make a lot of realist literature, are they using a lot of realist conventions that a lot of other realist composers used, or do they subvert it? Are there a lot of fourth wall breaks, as I was talking about, where the character literally would directly talk to the author, or the narrative voice would directly talk to the audience, not the author? Is there authorial intrusion? And that's essentially where the author literally inserts their own voice and their own ideas into the piece. And is it self-referential? Okay, so it discusses its own writing or language or fictionality. All right, so that's reading the text done, okay? I know that felt like a lot, but let's finally move on to part 2, which is writing analysis. Okay, so as we've kind of started to hint at, we looked at how language and form must come together in your critical analysis. Now let's bring in the other element, which is your concepts, okay? Your argument. In your argument, you obviously talk about your argument, and then you can talk about how form is used to help convey that argument. And then when you use your individual pieces of evidence, that's your language. So here is where your personal interpretation is. Why? Because you need to use all 3 elements to have your own personal interpretation. So 4 concepts, things that you could be exploring is how your text navigates through binaries, how it contends with human fallibility, how it probes universal truths for their value, how it encapsulates a time period, or how it reveals how human experience is constructed by power. Those are all random. You could have your own, but really what I'm trying to convey is that you also have concepts. Okay, coming back to this paragraph structure. So I'm going to actually let you guys read this on your own with me, and then I'll give you guys 20 seconds to read it, and while you read it I'm going to have a sip of my coffee, just because if I read this my voice will probably disappear in 5 minutes. So let's read it for 20 seconds and then kind of talk about it. Okay, hopefully that's enough time. I'm sorry if you didn't get to finish. But what I want to look at here is this idea, how we see concept, language, and form overlap. Okay, so we have this idea of powerful racial narratives and how it leads to Othello's deterioration. Okay, I'm sorry if you guys haven't read the play Othello yet. Some of you might, some of you won't. The idea here isn't to get you guys to teach you guys about Othello. We're looking at the structure, so don't worry nonetheless. So we have, as I said, this idea of how powerful racial narratives affect the protagonist, Othello, okay? And how it's illustrated in the form, the change in speech, okay, aka rhetoric. Rhetoric, what is rhetoric? That's a common question I get asked. Rhetoric is how protagonist, how any character talks. So, are they talking really noble and blah, 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 or are they talking really timid and shy? And that's rhetoric, okay? The way that the speech or the dialogue is presented. Obviously, that's really important in films and plays. Why? Because those are 2 forms. Forms as in the type of
text they are, not as in the macro techniques. Those are two forms that are presented, okay? They are performed, whereas a novel is read. It's not performed to you in the same way that a play or a film is. So rhetoric, you can't really talk about novels, but in a film and a play, like Othello, you would really want to talk about it. So, and rhetoric is a part, the changes in rhetoric throughout the play obviously is all throughout, so that's a part of form. So this student has brought in form, and then spoken about how it changes. So which at the beginning of the play is refined and resonates with images and metaphors, and then talks about literary techniques. Okay, so has basically done this, has spoken about concept, form, and now techniques. And then techniques again, and then we're talking about his later rhetoric, okay, the development of his rhetoric, so form. And we're using that to prove our argument, okay? This is what I'm talking about. This is what I want to see. See how there's a level of sophistication here? It's distinct from just, this is the idea, this is my evidence, this is technique, this is more evidence for that, this is more evidence for that. We're developing our ideas. We're talking about how form is changing. This is what we want. Okay. I think we have one more. Yeah. All right, let's read this one as well and talk about it. We won't read that one, but let's read this one. I'll give you guys another minute to read it because this one's shorter, and then we'll talk about it. Okay. All right. So, as you can probably guess, the same thing's happening here, right? We have this personal interpretation of this student falling here. We have the concept, okay? This concept of, where is it? They explicitly say chaos and confinement, okay? And freedom, okay? The tension between these two. Is form brought in? Yeah. Physical space, right? Setting is used. Specifically the setting of the airport and what the airport represents. Okay, so the ideas and the symbolism of the airport. Oh my gosh. Sorry. And then, of course, we have some literary techniques as well. So we have, where is it? Symbolism or symbolic. Okay, I'm not sure if there are any others here, but we do have some literary techniques, and I apologize if I'm not picking up on them right now. Nonetheless, some literary techniques, right? And as well as that, we also have the narrative technique of this rags to riches arc, okay, or narrative, which is another element of form. So as you can see, our analysis is falling there. Now, a nice little other thing that the student has done is spoken about modernity. Okay, so the era that this composer comes from and modernist values that are being conveyed. Now, I'm not going to go into what modernity is, or like different literary eras or literary movements or literary theories, but I would say, particularly if you're in English Advanced, certainly if you're in English Extension 1, and most certainly if you're in English Extension 2 next year, start to explore different literary theories and different eras of literature. So Romanticism, Modernism, Postmodernism, all different realism, deconstructionist views, all those different things, and help or start to bring them into your writing, okay? That will deeply sophisticate your writing. Okay, we're not going to talk about this one as well, but it's another example. If you do want to download these slides, you should be able to download them below and you can have a read through of this. Otherwise, you can screenshot. Okay.
All right, so as I said, you don't want to list your techniques, okay? You don't want to list every single technique in a quote. Sometimes every single technique in a quote won't be beneficial. It won't actually do anything for your writing or for that individual argument. Some techniques will be stronger for some arguments than others. That's why in your notes table, you want to have different techniques all throughout. So that way you can, for each argument, say, all right, if I get asked about this question, I would use I'd use this piece of evidence for this argument, and then use these techniques which are best suited for this argument. Whereas for this argument, these techniques are best suited. Okay, other things that you do want to do, you want to select the most relevant technique and effect to your argument and or the most oppressive one, as I said. So for synecdoche, consider how it contributes to the tone. Okay. However, if they contribute to the same effect, talk about both. This is what I was talking about before, right? Try to make your techniques come together like a working gears to create audience effect, just like how there are multiple parts of a car that allow a car to move. You want to use different techniques to point to different effects that occur in the same quote, okay? And be really conscious of how you can argue different techniques, as I said, to align with different arguments. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Well, instead of saying something like, so this is a quote from Sylvia Plath's poetry, who hopefully some of you guys look at Year 12. Some of you definitely will look at in Year 12. I say hopefully because I studied Sylvia Plath in Year 12 and I absolutely loved studying Sylvia Plath. So hopefully you guys get to as well. Maybe you won't though. But nonetheless, this is piece of evidence from one of her poems. So, a sort of walking miracle, my skin bright as a Nazi lampshade. Here, Plath uses imagery, illusion, metaphor, and enchantment to convey the cruelty that characterizes the suppression of her identity. That's not what we're going to do, okay? You're literally there just listing quotes. Instead, we want something like this. A sort of walking miracle, my skin bright as a Nazi lampshade. The lineated my skin evokes a synecdoche disembodiment from her own identity, heightening her audience's understanding of the objectification and depersonalization of a woman's identity. Such depersonalization is rendered violent in Plath's perturbing metaphor, which alludes to the cruelty of the Holocaust. Okay, for each of those techniques, we've went through and we've spoken about what each one is to create one overarching effect, not just, this is what I was talking about before, right? In the very beginning. Through the use of these techniques, this is done. We don't want that. See how this is more sophisticated? This is what you want to work toward. Okay, you don't want to just simply state an effect on the audience without actually explaining what it is. You do, however, want to explain the audience effect and explain how techniques create a certain audience effect. So take the step to concisely explain the technique before giving the effect and do not list. Separate the effect into a new sentence. Consider the audience impact directly. So you want to say things like, this disorients the audience. This frustrates the audience. This positions the audience to want to do this. That kind of language I'm really hoping for when I'm reading your work. And remember, you are the audience. What emotional reaction does the text cause you? How does it make you feel and think about the world? Okay, so this is the structure you want to follow for your analysis. Again, I'm really hesitant to say structure because I don't want you guys to follow it as rigid as this. You can put your technique before your effect. You can talk about your effect of the technique before you've even introduced your evidence. Completely up to you. Again, guidelines, right? You want to follow these different elements you want to make sure your piece has all these different elements. So, actually, I haven't even went through them. So, first you want to introduce your evidence. Okay, not first. One of the things you want to do, obviously, is introduce your evidence. Then talk about the techniques present in your evidence. Then talk about the effect of each individual technique. You're talking about symbolism, what's being symbolically referenced here. You're talking about metaphor, what's being metaphorically referenced. You're talking about polysyndeton, where is a polysyndeton, what is it doing? And then effect of the quote. So effect of the technique and effect of the quote is different. How or why? See how we spoke about synecdoche, I'm always going to struggle with that word, and spoke about what the effect of that is, and then it contributed to the overall depersonalization, and the cruelty of the Holocaust. Okay, so we had individual analysis of just that technique and how it kind of related to the overarching point. We're going to look at more pieces of evidence of that though, or yeah. Okay, then you want to relate to the big idea. What is the big idea? Your overarching argument of the paragraph, okay? What you're trying to say all throughout your paragraph. So let's look at this sample analysis of an imaginary student, aka me. This is bad, okay? I'm going to critique myself here and say that this that I wrote was awful, but I did it intentionally, okay, to my defense. Nonetheless, let's have a read of this. So, this thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. That is a quote from The Tempest, okay, a play that you might study. Through anastrophe, active voice, and a short, simple sentence structure, Shakespeare demonstrates how taking personal responsibility, in this case for Caliban's actions, forges a path for moral growth. So, again, this is doing what we don't want to do. Through these techniques, this is what we see, okay? We don't want that. The overall effect of the quote is correct, okay? There is the overall effect of the quote, but you didn't talk about what each individual technique here is doing. How do we achieve this through these techniques? Okay, the techniques are correct. There are, in fact, these 3 techniques in this quote, but what are each of them doing? So essentially, these 2 haven't actually been bridged. I don't know how from this we got to here. Instead, we want to do something like this. This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. Shakespeare's subtle use of anastrophe centers the first-person pronoun, foregrounding Prospero's desire to take personal responsibility for Caliban's immorality. This effect is heightened by the use of active voice and a short, irrefutable sentence structure that color Prospero's tone with decisiveness. Thus, audiences may observe how personal responsibility leads to moral growth. So, can you see how we have went through and said, all right, what's the effect of this technique? What's the effect of this technique? It's okay that the effect of both of these techniques were grouped together because they achieve the same effect. So if both of your techniques achieve the exact same effect, you can do that. That will often be the case for things like active voice and sentence structure. It's very rarely the case for things like metaphors. Similarly, you can't really group those things together. Usually it's more to do with structure that you can group together or repetition. Nonetheless, we've spoken about the effect of each individual technique. Then we related it to this big overarching effect of the quote, okay? And audience effect. This is more what we want to do rather than this. And here is another example of that. So this is what I keep talking about, right? My personal pet peeve when I'm marking, things that I don't want to see. So things like, through the use of a metaphor in, her pain was a bullet lodging deeper and deeper into her soul, which is a quote from, do I have it there? No, sorry. It's a quote from some text that you may study in either year 11 or 12. The composer demonstrates the theme of hardship as he figuratively states the adversity of the protagonist. I don't want to see that, okay? What is this metaphor? What's being metaphorically referenced? Okay, and you only have 1 technique there. I need more techniques. So instead of that, we want to work towards this. The composer's use of metaphor and repetition in her pain was a bullet lodging deeper and deeper into her soul personifies the adversity of the central protagonist and illustrates, how incessant the protagonist's trauma is. Okay, so 3 techniques there. This crafting is quite impactful in portraying the experience of hardship that the protagonist endures to readers, where they understand the power and suffering attributed to the protagonist's hardship. We've done all of that now, okay? That's what we want to work up to. You can now see the difference in sophistication between this kind of more band 4 response and this band 5, band 6 response. Don't stress if this is you right now. As I keep saying, use year 11 as the time to build off this skill. So this is a kind of minor thing in your writing. When you're introducing a quote, you don't need to say things like, in the quote we can see, or this can be seen in the quote, this can be seen in, don't need to say that. Just literally insert the quote without any preamble before. So
Do, however, contextualize the quote with the concept you are trying to explain, okay? The best way to do this is use the quote to explain your ideas. So things like, Richard's character is contorted by a Machiavellian desire for power. Indeed, his opening soliloquy declares, now is the winter of our discontent. Sorry. So you can see that I'm trying to talk about how Richard's character is contorted or distorted by a Machiavellian desire for power. Okay, so he's overly ambitious, and I'm proving that with our evidence. I'm not saying, indeed, in the quote, now is the winter. I'm using it almost, it's really cohesive. It's really implemented in there really nicely. So this will help combat that blockiness that a lot of HSC markers talk about. Having it in there really cohesively integrated very nicely. You should also contextualize who is speaking and where in the plot we are situated. This doesn't really mean saying that in Act 1 or Chapter 3 of the text. No. Just kind of tell us who says that quote and generally what's going on, but not plot retell, okay? Maybe in like the first half of the sentence, just kind of ground me. Because sometimes if you are using a really different quote, which we like, but sometimes because it's not such a common quote as your marker, I can kind of be like, all right, who actually said this again? So just tell me. Here are some introductory phrases you can have in your writing to better integrate your quotes without saying within the quote, or this can be seen in this quote. So you can say things like, such a notion is epitomized by the protagonist's, I don't know, soliloquy, and then insert the quote from the soliloquy. This is visualized in the protagonist's dialogue. Insert the piece of evidence from the dialogue. This is encapsulated by blah, blah, blah. Prospera's soliloquy, for example, captures this idea in this quote, whatever. Really the idea here is just use different ways of integrating the quotes so it's more cohesive and less blocky. You will develop your own style by reading sample essays and writing your own. So take from sample essays as you write it. Okay, so let's have a look at this now. So I will read this one. So it's no longer a magic staff, it's only a wooden stick. Felix upends the motif of the cane as a representation of the power of the theatre through reducing the symbolism of the cane to its mere metonym. This is further emphasized through his dismissive tone, where he finally rejects his performance and becomes liberated from his own performance of grief over the loss of his daughter, unshackling himself of the constraints of his self-imposed prison. That's... wow. If you're thinking, what the heck just went on? So am I. So don't stress. Let's have another read of that sentence together. This is further emphasized through his dismissive tone, where he finally rejects performance and becomes liberated from his own performance of grief over the loss of his daughter, unshackling himself of the constraints of his self-imposed prison. Wow. There's a lot happening there, and not in a good way. Firstly, it's super imbalanced. And why am I saying this? Because that's what I see when I tell students to do this. They try to put all of it into one sentence. No, this is what happens. Oh my gosh. Sorry. No. Yes? No. Sorry, I shouldn't go back. This is what happens when you try to integrate that all into one sentence. It's too much. Each sentence should have one main idea. There's just way too much going on here for me to even follow. Another thing you need to keep in mind is in prelims, this might happen, but this will certainly happen in the HSC. Again, I know we're not at the HSC yet, but we are approaching quicker than you may think. So it's good to start to have a think about it nonetheless. But your HSC marker isn't going to read your essay more than once. So your teacher might go over it, and then, oh, okay, that's what she meant, that's what he meant. Your HSC marker is not going to do that, okay? Your HSC marker is going to read it once, they don't understand it, too bad, I'm going to go on to the next essay, okay? It sucks, but it's the truth. So if you're someone that writes like this and you're not clear, your marker is not going to catch up. They're only going to read it once, they don't care. So what's the issue with this? Obviously, there's way too much going in the sentence. It needs to be broken up into each individual part. I'm not saying following this structure, but these parts need to still be in there, just separated from each other, so it's clearer for your marker to read. Also, it's a bit repetitive. we're talking about becoming liberated from his own performance and his own entrapment. And then we say it again, of his self-imposed prison. Okay, we keep saying that. Not necessary. Okay, so we want this instead. Atwood ultimately reveals the act of performing to itself be constraining, as Felix emphatically rejects the audience in the final scene. It's no longer a magic staff, it's only a wooden stick. As the symbolism of the cane is reduced to its mere metonym, Felix's dismissive tone upends the motif and finds liberation in refusing to assign metaphor to his life. So much clearer, so much better, okay? A lot of the time, it actually helps to take on the role of the marker for you to kind of know what you need to do yourself. So activities like this actually really help you because it's very hard to mark your own writing, believe it or not, which is why I kind of am hinting about giving it to your teacher and giving it to tutors and giving it to your siblings who maybe can help you. Because as you can see, it's harder to mark your own writing. But you were able to mark this with me, right? So it's important to do activities like this to know what you shouldn't be doing. Okay, so do end your intro analysis or paragraphs logically and smoothly by summarizing your arguments. So intro should always end with a statement synthesizing your argument and audience effect. Your introduction's final sentence should be addressing the audience effect. Ultimately, what is your composer teaching you, rebutting to you? What are they showing you about the world? What are they contrasting? Whatever. Needs to be audience effect, okay? And then your linking sentence should always be woven throughout your analysis. You shouldn't be topping and tailing. So what I mean by that is you shouldn't just be kind of throwing in your link to the question in the intro and in the final sentence. You need to be talking about the question all throughout. That is another big piece of or area of feedback that I want to kind of hone in on, okay? A lot of students in their practice writing, especially in year 12, so it's something to be mindful of now and kind of stop it while we can. A lot of students will give me great analysis, give me a great personal voice, give me great arguments. I'm blown away what they're writing, but it simply just doesn't answer the question. Okay, which is so sad for me because I must mark them through the eyes of the question, through the lens of the question. You can present to me the most beautiful piece of writing ever, but if it doesn't answer the question, it doesn't answer the question. Okay, I need you to answer the question for me. So that means not just doing it in the first sentence of your body paragraph and the final sentence. All throughout, your argument needs to be tailored to the question. Now, this is what I was talking to you guys in the beginning about not having like that kind of rote learning and not having just memorized paragraphs that you're spewing out when you're doing your essays or when you're doing your assessments, because that's another way we can tell. Okay, because you're not actually answering the question. Why? Because you didn't design that argument around the question. You designed it and now you're trying to force it onto the question. That's why, as I said, it's all about developing your idea around the question once you get into the exam room. I know it sounds like I'm kind of going on and on about this, but I cannot tell you how many students get marked down because of this. You haven't answered the question enough. That's something I can guarantee you. If you know any Year 12 students, go ask them. Has your teacher ever mentioned that? Guarantee you they'll say yes. Okay, it's the biggest thing students get marked on. Okay, so ending without synthesizing is abrupt and doesn't sufficiently tie your argument together neatly. As I said, markers will not see how anything you've said so far links to your thesis. Yes. Okay. All right. So this is something that I wanted to just give you guys as a little activity to practice with. You will likely have to do short answer questions to unseen text obviously that you haven't seen before in your prelims. So I thought this is something that maybe you can just screenshot, or if you want to download the slides and come back to, it's completely up to you. But really this is just a little activity that I thought I'd throw in there for you guys so you can practice with and use everything that we've just spoken about and apply it to this. So it's a poem called Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. And I've just written a little question. How is mortality developed as an idea in this poem? Something you can analyze 1 to 2 pieces, of evidence to support your argument. Something that you can use to study with for prelims and just in general. If you do this, I would recommend handing it in to someone to get some feedback. But yeah, I would also recommend doing this so you can put into practice everything that we've actually done today. Okay, let's go through and bust some myths of critical analysis. So, complex sounding techniques are required for high marks. That's one myth. No, that's not true. As long as your technique develops your argument about a theme, it will score well. Okay, so just because you've thrown in a complex sounding technique, if you don't understand what it is or you're not actually using it appropriately or in a way that actually achieves what you're trying to say it achieves, you will actually lose marks. You need to recount parts of your story to contextualize your argument. No, as I said, you can presume the markers know what you're talking about. A set number of quotes is required to get a band 6. Again, that's certainly not true. You need to include enough evidence to support a detailed argument and will vary based on your argument. You will know as you write your argument when you've reached a level where you've proven what you've said, okay? But I know I can just, again, sense that someone's asked it, how many quotes would you recommend per body paragraph? It's something I always get asked, okay? And I know I've just said that there is no definitive number, but we all are never happy with that. We all want a definitive answer. So I'm going to say at least 3 to 4 is where you want to be at. 3 to 4 pieces of evidence per body paragraph. Now, each piece of evidence must be only around 7 to 8 words. Okay, I do not ever want to see, or your markers don't want to see, long-winded pieces of evidence. No. Why? One, because you're letting the text speak for you. You don't want that. You want to speak for the text and give your ideas and arguments on the text. And 2, there's a possibility that you'll miss out on some techniques, that you won't cover some techniques that need to be covered. Okay, and you don't want that. So having a nice succinct quote that best encapsulates what you're trying to say is what you want to aim for. So even though I've said there is no definitive number and it'll depend on your argument, I know that we're never satisfied with that. So I'm going to say 3 to 4 quotes. Okay, another thing is the idea that you should analyze quotes to learn about the author's context. Okay, no, you shouldn't analyze quotes to learn about the author's context. Instead, the text may reflect their context, and you can talk about the context, but you are aiming to argue what the text meaning is. Okay, the only way or the only time you should be bringing in context is to support your argument. Okay, it's not a context study. You're not talking about what happened in their life, and it's not an autobiography. Or a biography, sorry. Only quotes count as evidence? No, as we know now, you must analyze form. Form, if you're thinking, hold on, how do I analyze form though? You will bring in quotes, okay? So if you're looking at setting, bring in an individual quote in regards to setting and then pick out the micro techniques in that individual quote and talk about how those individual techniques contribute to setting and create a distinct setting, for example. Juxtaposition and contrast are the same technique. Nope, don't use juxtaposition just because it sounds fancier. Juxtaposition is more so when we have 2 things right next to each other. So for example, if we have, let me think on the spot of an example. Okay, let's say we're watching a movie and we know this protagonist is really lonely and isolated and maybe a bit depressed, and they're put in a really crowded room or crowded space where there's a lot of people around, and everyone's really happy and dancing, and I don't know, there's music going on, let's just say. That's juxtaposition, okay? Because we put kind of 2 opposites next to each other. Contrast is different. Contrast is where things are compared or different, yes, but they're not right next to each other. They're kind of like ideas in the text at large that are contrasted. So maybe in the beginning of the text, it will talk about one idea, let's say, loneliness, and then later in the text, it talks about sociability, okay? Obviously, those contrast each other, but they're not happening right next to each other in the same scene as juxtaposition is, okay? All right. that is our critical analysis covered. Now, down below in the Slido, I'm sure you guys have been asking questions, but if you have any questions on critical analysis, if anything that I've said doesn't make sense, at all, please jot down below some questions, and I'll be answering them live as this is kind of playing. Okay.